Hello again, it's David Willey on, I think this is 22 of our question and answer sessions, and I'm here still in my back garden doing these question and answer sessions, even though the Tank Museum, we are now back open. And I say this every time, if you fancy coming along, do book in advance to the Tank Museum. And one of the questions I've been asked, because I'll be answering questions people have sent in, is it Reese Fouracre said he hasn't had a reply from the archive. We're not all back yet, so the archive's not back in working, so they can't answer inquiries at the moment. So sorry about that, but we'll let you know, obviously, and check the website if there's anything in particular you're interested in seeing or doing. But we explain there all the things that having to wear a face mask, etc. But it's all the issues are on our website, so do have a look there. And those of you who've been watching these before know what happens, which is I sit here, I answer questions that people have either emailed in or put in the comments below where I can, and I also try and sell you some of the items we're selling from our online shop, because that, as we found over this period, has been a tremendously useful source of income for the Tank Museum. We're an independent charity, and this money really helps us keep going. So in these, as everyone keeps saying, these difficult times. So, and thank you as ever for all of you who've been buying stuff. And I am joined, I don't know if he's in the shot at the moment, by the dog, Finn, so I have to throw the ball every now and again. And I just sat down here a couple of moments ago. It's, by the way, it's been one of those days in, yesterday we had a flood at the museum, absolutely hammered down with rain. It was so sudden, so dense in the afternoon, and we ended up having in some areas, a few inches of water all over everything. So most of us were there till way past my bedtime anyway last night, trying to get all the water out and drying things out this morning. It's been one of those days. I set all this up, had to cover it all with tarpaulin a few moments ago. We've had a really heavy shower. I mean, I don't know if you can hear that, but there's thunder in the background, but we've got a bit of sunshine at the moment. So hopefully I'm going to get this done in the right period and throw the ball as long as Finn, when he hears the thunder, sometimes he suddenly disappears off into the house. He's not over keen on thunder and lightning, are you, dog? But let me just throw the ball for you so you can just go and all the water as well. He can go and play there and hopefully keep himself amused. But anyway, on with our questions. So yes, all the different sorts of questions people are coming in. Darth, is it Calanil, has bought a Tiger II kit, and I think he's waiting for the other one or something, or he's waiting for the Tiger II kit to arrive. What I would say, so modelers, that brings me on to modelers. We do have a look. We're constantly getting new models in. So if you're a bit of a model fan, keep going back to the online shop site, because there's a lot there now we're getting, including, and I've been told to actually point these ones out to you, a couple of Challenger. This is apparently a brand new kit that's come out, which is what they're calling Challenger II TES Theatre Entry Standard. And what they're really saying there, Theatre Entry Standard, is when everything's been added to a vehicle, and there is an example of everything being added to a vehicle that's kept here at Bovington, where we are, at a unit called Armoured Trials and Development Unit. That tank, you'll often see photographs of it. They nicknamed it Megatron, and that one tank, if there's a new add-on that they're putting on a tank, they try it on Megatron first to see it doesn't interfere with something else, or will it all mix together. Now, why I pointed out that kit, because it's another thing that not everyone picks up on. This is another kit we've got. It's a Tamiya one, and it's actually of Challenger II as it was being used in Iraq. So with all the extra armour, sand shields, etc., are put on the sides. And again, ironically, you'd call that theatre entry standard as well, because in other words, it's done up for the theatre it was going to serve in. Most of the Challenger 2s you'll see around at Bovington when they're doing driver training, etc., don't have all those bells and whistles, the extra armour bolted on the front and the sides. So that's, it's different stages the vehicle goes through when it goes off on operations. And I mentioned those because, again, new kits and everything, so for the model makers, and it also touches on a subject I know a number of you have been asking questions about, which is what's all this in the papers about the British Army saying it might say goodbye to Challenger 2. So what I would say there is Challenger 2 at the moment, there is something called the Life Extension Programme, which has just about got to the point of signing a contract, and then it will be having the new Rheinmetall turret with a smoothbore 120mm gun. That'll probably all be done with a company called RBSL, which is a combination. RBSL was Rheinmetall bought a 55% stake in BAE Land Systems. BAE Land Systems had bought Vickers, the old original builders of Challenger 2. So why I say note of caution, this may well be another one of those classic let's get in there first stories, because a defence review is ongoing in Britain. We've had COVID, economic situation is not brilliant. There are bound to be cuts in the Ministry of Defence budget. But that's going to be part and parcel, one hopes and assumes, as a wider strategic defence review. What's the British Army and Defence Forces there for? Where do we think they're going to fight, and what are they going to need if they're going to have to do that? So careful, because this may well be one of those, every time there's a defence review, if the RAF are asked to surrender some money or cut something, what's the first thing the RAF do? Is they always come out with something like, oh, we can give up the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, or the Red Arrows or something, which immediately causes a great hoo-ha in the papers. And I wonder if this is another one of those things where it's just sort of like get in there first and say we can't possibly lose our tanks, can we, before the actual defence review even comes out. So remember, it's a leak. It's unattributed. It is not certainly the Army's policy as it currently stands. Watch this space. And if you're interested in this issue, do have a look on our Facebook posts, because on one of them there it shows a link where I was doing an interview with I think it's British Forces News, where again there's those standard questions: do we still need tanks? What are they there for? What's the state of the tanks in the rest of the world? Why have some countries got rid of tanks and now are buying them back? All the arguments that we've been saying on these question and answers and some of our tank chats before. But that is no official announcement. The British Army has not said it's getting rid of tanks as yet as part of any defence review. So careful we don't take all these things out of context and too far too soon. So that's kind of answers a lot. I know, well, I say answers, it's kind of brings up that subject that I know an awful lot of you have been mentioning, and it's bound to be one that we come back to. If you look at the end of our Challenger 2 tank chat, I do mention we're going to try and keep you abreast of what's going on with that Challenger 2 LEP programme, and have a look. And we've been seeing if we can make arrangements. There's a big defence show. They've, like with everything else with COVID, a lot of them been knocked on the head, but we were hoping to have that Challenger 2 with the new turret down at the Tank Museum for Tank Fest. It's in the UK now. It's all being looked at, trialled, various things going on, and it may well be going to another defence show, which, if that still goes on in November, we hope we can get there, and we hope we can get you some footage of it and tell you what's going on with that as well. So right, throw the ball again, keep the dog keep the dog happy. There we go. Next question. Black Prince asks a question: winter camo, was it ever used on First World War tanks? No, I've got no evidence of that at all, because most of the tank attacks, there is a tank attack where they're going in and actually starts snowing, but because of the nature of First World War fighting tends to stop over the winter months, or the main campaigns aren't going on over the winter months where tanks are being used. So I've seen no evidence of that. But if you buy our Haynes Mark IV manual, you'll see in there some amazing test camouflage schemes that they were trialling, including a black and white zigzag one that looked like Dazzle ships. So have a look at that, because we bought this particular print with some netting over the top of the tank as well, and it's quite an amazing scheme that was being trialled there. It doesn't actually see service use, but someone proved me wrong, but I've seen no evidence at all of ever tanks being painted white, as in a snow camouflage, as it were, in the First World War. Mr. Kanzai asked a question about the thicker armour that Sherman tanks. Shermans go through a series of upgrades, obviously during their production runs, different models, and also things like applique armour being placed on the sides over where the ammunition was stowed, and there was also field modifications. And one of the questions he asked was how many tanks did they go, because it's a well-known fact they actually chopped up some, and they got armour plate off some knocked out tanks to either put on the fronts of some of the Shermans. Now Chrysler in America actually did an official experiment with this, sort of trying to work out if you could put this on. It doesn't go into terms of kits, because they did wonder if they might be add-on kits they could do in the field, but that doesn't actually happen. But I looked in the Bibles, as it were, for American vehicles is honeycut. They're great big thick tomes. If you ever see one going cheap, buy it. I really recommend it. And honeycut on the Sherman. They don't give any figures. He mentions about this idea about getting armour plate off of other Shermans that have been knocked out, certainly applying it on the front plates of Shermans that are in service, but there's no figures for how many that was done by. And I think, as we've mentioned before in some of these other question and answers, some of this is down to where the unit was, what access it's got to field supplies, support, the equipment, time, because again, if you're on the move, that's not going to be one of those operations you can carry on with particularly. It's going to take a bit of time to do. I think it's down again to the local commander as well. And as we mentioned in a previous tank chat, Patton and the forces under Patton, he was dead against it and really made a stink if anyone added extra to their tanks, like this concrete, sandbags sometimes, etc., that sort of stuff, because his argument was it slows the tank down and you lose some of your protection, which was speed and mobility in a Sherman. And if you make yourself too slow, you just become more of a target. And as I've mentioned before, Montgomery, slightly the other way, he said if it makes the guys feel good about it themselves, let them do it. Whether it has much practical benefit, as I said last time, bound to have some, because you are literally thickening the level of armour. Whether it makes a really, really fundamental difference if you're coming up against high velocity rounds. But if the guys felt okay about it, Montgomery said do it. Is it Papa asks why these basically things like the 15 centimetre howitzer were put on Panzer II chassis and not Panzer III ones? I think what you're looking at here is just the fundamental. I think someone else came back on the comments on this, just the fundamental that Panzer I and Panzer IIs are used for some of these modified self-propelled guns as being readily available and being reused. As we said, the Germans tend to reuse their chassis if they possibly can when we're coming on to those later production models. And at the time they're doing this with the guns you're mentioning here, the howitzers earlier on in the war, actually the Panzer III, they've still not got enough. Panzer III's coming out as gun tanks, so as their equivalent of really a cruiser tank. And that's why they probably do not want to see any dissipation of that production of Panzer III in its traditional role. And it's only later, of course, that again with the end of the use of the Panzer III that does happen, but they're pretty much still seeing service in their, the end model. It ends up with that 75mm gun on it. But there's that sense of actually the Sturmgeschütz is a much better use of that production time than just doing self-propelled artillery. Lee Harding, what's the earliest modification on a tank? It's a tricky one to actually answer this, because goodness knows what guys did. You see some of those early First World War tanks, now what's the modification count as? Is it things like some of the tanks have got things like a horseshoe put on the front, so a good luck symbol, a horseshoe, like a traditional metal horseshoe is welded on the front. Is that really an adaptation? Not really, it's just like a good luck thing. But we know the Mark I's, and we thought the photograph was in France, but it's almost certainly taken at Elverden. One of the first adaptations seems to be the erection of a wooden framework with chicken wire over the top, and the idea being that the flat roof of the tanks, if you've got a stick grenade or a bundle of grenades, if they were thrown on the roof of the tank, they could rest there. So why not put netting down the top so they'd roll down the sides? Now we know that C Battalion's tank in the first tank attack at Flers, they are being used, this netting. So that's an adaptation, because they certainly weren't done that way in the factory. But we think it's even earlier, when the training ground at Elverden, there's a photograph there with a guy with his leather helmet on out the top of one of these tanks, and again you can see there that netting on the top. So my gut feeling is that's probably the first proper mod to a vehicle that's done by the troops themselves. And I say the troops themselves because it's obviously by this time the tanks have actually got to heavy branch, the chaps that are going to use the tanks that way. So I hope that kind of answers it, but the moral behind it is the minute a bit of kit is issued, soldiers tend to start either adapting it to make it more comfortable, to make it more effective, to give it more armour protection, to make it more useful. All those different factors come into play. And this is one of the interesting things we have with modern designers and everybody coming along with things, you know, all very well coming up with very good ideas and things that way, but what are the troops, the user, how are they going to interface with it or adapt it, or perhaps even negate the whole purpose of what you've added something for, you know. So, and again, you look at the history of vehicles, that's another one of these really interesting things that comes out all the time. You know, we did it for this reason, and the guys didn't like it, they used to sort of turn it off or throw it away, do things that way. Or you get what they might call additionality. Sometimes they do things and there's added benefits they didn't even realise, and the troops help do that for vehicles. Right, let's going on. Yeah, super, is it? Oh, I can't read all these names. Is it Super Harak? Asks, do model companies come to the Tank Museum to make models? And that kind of, back to the modelling bit again, kind of sets me up for one of the things is we are going to be doing an online modelers event. We're just sort of starting to do planning. I mentioned it before, we can't do our modelling event in October, so we're putting together some films and talking to people, and one of those is going to be about a model company and how they use a tank museum and how they go through that process of coming up with an end model. So look out for that in the future. We're going to be doing that one, but I also thought it was an excuse to dig out this book, which was given to me. This is from Tamiya and Mr. Tamiya, who, the famous modelling company, this is his autobiography, and he writes very, very nicely about the Tank Museum and in the early days of doing his modelling, where he was trying to get access to the equipment in different places so that he could then make. And he talks here, we get a lot of mentions in his autobiography, and he talks here about coming to the Tank Museum. We are talking, this is probably back in the late 60s or 70s, and he gets in correspondence with someone called Nigel Duncan, and the English agent who meets Mr. Tamiya to take him down to the Tank Museum, who's ex-service, suddenly realised this is General Nigel Duncan, and Nigel Duncan's going to meet him. And Nigel Duncan, again, he's Royal Tank Regiment, serves in World War II. He comes up in some of the funny stories and everything else. So Mr. Tamiya is quite taken aback that there's a general meeting him and shaking his hand and saying thanks very much. And I won't read all the stuff he says about coming to the Tank Museum and what they got up to, but he says here, thereafter I began to visit Bovington every year. I've always been warmly welcomed. There has been a succession of different directors after General Duncan, all of whom have been just as courteous and gentlemanly as he was. It's now over 30 years since I first went there, but they'll still greet me with the same warmth and enthusiasm as on my first visit. Of all the military museums I've visited overseas, there is none that has treated me as well as Bovington. Every time I went, I used to show how grateful I was with some modest gift, until on one occasion the director at the time suggested that rather than a little expression of gratitude every visit, I should think about making a financial contribution to the museum. They could then build an exhibition hall linking the name of Tamiya to the museum forever. In a museum like Bovington, where many of the tanks are outside and exposed to the elements, building a hall where the tanks could be displayed under cover would be a very meaningful gift. I agreed wholeheartedly to the director's proposal. And he goes on there, and he comes back over and he says about the opening ceremony in 1991, which for us we still call our Tamiya Hall. And he says this: after I'd made the speak, a plaque was unveiled on which the walls Tamiya Hall were engraved. This was a big surprise to me, as no one had said anything about the new hall being given the name of Tamiya. It's unusual for an exhibition hall to bear the name of a business, let alone the name of an individual. When I returned to my seat, I was congratulated by my wife and daughter, who were tearful with the emotion of it all. And he goes on to say various bits and pieces. Anyway, lovely stuff. And if you're a keen modeller, or you like, and I was looking online, these interesting stories about the background about Tamiya is obviously a major player in the game. And I mentioned that about our modelling event because what also happened for me, I used to make models when I was a kid and everything else, and it just so happened at the weekend I ended up with my sister depositing the house back at home, where I'd squirreled away an awful lot of my kit over time in the roof. Not just me, it was other family stuff up there, and anyway the roof started looking like it was bowing. So last weekend my sister came down with a van full of lots of I think it was about 50 tin helmets, all this ridiculous sort of, some of the other militaria I'd collected over time, and books and all your old school reports and notebooks and other sort of stuff. But to my own amazement, what came out as well was a whole load of those early, look at that, August 1976 military modelling, and it was really interesting having looked through here at some of the old magazines and suddenly remembering how you got excited about certain types of images and what got you going. And for me, this was the one that got me at the time. He seemed to be a cut above everybody else, but Francois Verlinden used to do these dioramas that used to, at the time, for me, I just sort of, oh wow, wouldn't it be great to be able to make models like that? And I love making dioramas. And again, I found it, well, perhaps we'll use some of this in when we make some films for this modelling event. I found my photograph of me making of having made a Tiger One that I then found I did win this competition. I couldn't remember what it was, but it was in the Leaf Hall, Seaside Road, Eastbourne, a modelling competition back in the 70s. And there's I think my dad proudly took a picture of this. I hope when I'm going through all this rubbish, I might even find the certificate. There we are, that would be a great one to put on the wall. But anyway, so there we go. And one of those things, I've said it before, we've been talking to some people, some interesting people that we're hoping will be involved in our programme. That feeling about what model making is more than just putting a bit of plastic together with glue and paint. It's you feel like you're creating something, you're building something. And for, again, people of a certain generation, it takes you back, the smell, the glue, the hours on your own, that sense of, I just love that thrill of especially trying to make a diorama, getting down at eye level, looking at it. So we'll see how all that comes out in our hopefully our programme that we're going to be doing and putting out instead of our modelling event. So where else are we? Thank you for all those who came back about G10 watches. They think G10 stands for G1098. A number of you pointed that out, which was a sheet for, or the form for issuing stores. So G10's just an item that would come out from the stores on that piece of paper. Rob Lowsby said about, and again, he just said, I just nipped to your shop and ended up buying 4 models. And I mentioned that bit because don't you find this peculiar justification thing, shall I buy that one or that one? And then greedy boy that I am, that terrible temptation to get both of them, and then you have to justify it to yourself in some way, like, why I've done it. And I've talked before, there was an interesting British comedian who was in the shop, and I was with him and I showed him this rather expensive book, and I could see that classic look, desperately wanted it, and was trying to come up with his excuse for buying it. And then in the end he picked it up and said, I'll get it for my dad. And that peculiar, how we all justify our little hobbies to ourselves all the time. Makes me quite laugh, that, but you thought you were buying one and you bought 4. Well done. Viking123 says about our nice face wash. I didn't bring any that way, but and suggests we do a First World War tankers one. Tankers face masks in the First World War, they go like that with the lines in and the eye holes, and the chainmail comes down. If it's down there, it's in the wrong place. So we did think of that one, and we were trying to think, and we will still think of, if you've only got any other good ideas for face masks we could be selling. So we've got that one with the microphone one, and one with David Fletcher's moustache on. If you come up with other ideas, do let us know. Yes, CMAC, and here's another one of these really tricky ones, questions, interesting ones. Why were so many Covenanters made when everyone agrees they weren't a very successful tank? They never go off and actually see proper combat service. So what's the story behind it? And 1,770 Covenanter tanks were made. Isn't that just a ridiculous waste? Now this comes to an issue that, and this is one of the books, sadly we haven't got it in the shops, but British Tank Production and the War Economy, 34 to 45, Benjamin Coombs, and he's one of the guys I've been using to do some articles for our Tracklink magazine, which I've done the first one on British Tank Production, 30s and into the war years. And it's fundamentally, as a bigger picture to boil it down, one of the issues is Churchill, as I mentioned this before, he says, keep making tanks. We don't want to stop the factories, even though we know we've got the £6 gun, we've got the potential for better designs. I need a tank now rather than the promise of a better tank further down the line. And again, in this article in the books, one of the things that we sometimes overlook is when a factory stops production to retool, which is a massive expense in itself, to then start building a new model tank, that really takes time. And of course, Churchill in 1940, after the losses in France, is just desperate that whatever's potentially coming, don't hold it up in any way, keep building it. And tanks are put further back in terms of priority of build compared to aircraft, because they're considered, first of all, for defence, and then bombers, as we've said before, to get back at Germany. So what happens is we end up building tanks that even though we've got more improvements coming down the line, we carry on building tanks that perhaps we shouldn't have done and moving on to new models. And we had the good luck, and it comes out that really, in essence, with the Americans starting to supply the M3 and the M4 Grant tank through Lend-Lease for Britain, that also allowed us a little bit more breathing space to concentrate on putting together the tanks we did think we wanted to fight with, even though they were delayed as well, like the Cromwell, then the Comet, and of course later on the Centurion, which misses the end of the war. But in this book, I'll just point this one out. The continuation of existing tank production was re-emphasised in September 1941 when the Tank Board Chairman, Geoffrey Burton, confirmed that the Ministry of Supply programme would only change very slowly. In other words, don't think you're going to get all those new tanks starting to be built quickly. This was noted by Beaverbrook, who is then put in charge of tank production by Churchill, who was noted by Beaverbrook in attendance, who stated that the 1942 production programme must therefore continue unchanged. As a result, the problematic Covenanter tank would remain in production until October 1942, and the Matilda tank was expected to finish as late as February 1943. However, the Covenanter tank did not complete until January 43, and Matilda output extended until August, delaying the introduction of the later cruiser tanks designed to replace them. As examined in, go on that bit. Furthermore, a hasty cancellation of the obsolete Matilda and Covenanter tank programmes was avoided during 42 and 43 because, as discussed in Chapter 6, the United States were providing greater numbers of tanks under Lend-Lease to support the British war effort. So I come back to, if you've got a chance of getting hold of these books, looking at why things were built. We always, as I keep saying, look at the end product, be very critical of it sometimes. Why did we do this? You need to know the story behind why this was being done. As I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons Britain built so many light Mark 6 tanks was we thought it was a mature design and it was a good one to set the factories who were now starting to make tanks for the first time. Some of these companies that were converting from either railway carriage or heavy industries to making tanks. This was a good tank for you to cut your teeth on, and that's why we carried on making some of these things, even though we kind of half realised they weren't that needed anymore, but could be used for things like training, as the Covenanter was, despite its, and again, really interesting stuff. One of the interesting things we always have it in for the Covenanter, don't we? But in July 1942, they did a test of the then in-service tanks, because reports are coming back for the desert and various other places about, for example, some of the new tanks arriving with major faults. They blame the factories. Sometimes some of the faults arrive after the soldiers have tried to play with the vehicles, so all of a sudden, because of things they're doing, leads to sometimes things going wrong. So they were trying to get to the bottom of what's going wrong with some of these British tanks when they're arriving, especially in the North African campaign. So they did these tests in July 42, driving 1,000 miles to see what goes wrong first with the different models. And out of interest, the Valentine did 950 miles before a defect in the engine actually appeared. The Matilda II did 800 miles, which shows it's a pretty good design by this time. Covenanter, interestingly, did 600 miles, but, and we think the Covenanter is always considered the worst one, etc. The Crusader only did 400 miles before actually a major breakdown occurred. Covenanter, £12,000 each. So you imagine that, you're making 1,770. That was a lot of money going into those tanks. So they were used for training, but you know, this general consensus we've got, it was all a waste of time. Well, there's other subtleties to doing this sort of stuff. Anyway, so I hope that answers that bit of the question there. So does that answer me what I think I was going to say? So another one of those ones that I was just encouraged to have a word about. Those of you know we had to cancel Tank Fest. We've got Tiger Day coming up on the 19th of September, but that's sold, but we've got some premium tickets for the Friday. Now the idea is, for a premium ticket holder, what you do, you will come along on the Friday. Tiger runs on the Saturday, so you're going to need some sort of overnight accommodation or something somewhere. But what you'll get on the Friday as a premium ticket holder is, you come in, we give you a cup of coffee and a bit of breakfast. We take you, you get a closer look inside, put your heads in, climb on a number of the German tanks, the Tiger, the Panther, Panzer II, I think it is, we get out there, and the Panzer III. So you have a good look around on those ones. We take you over to the workshops, you see some of the projects going on over in the workshops, and you get the great joy of lecture from myself and I'm not sure who it's going to be at the moment, on our Tiger, some of the history behind it, some of the things we have to do to start the Tiger, etc., things like that, as part of a package, and a nice lunch and a chance, hopefully, social distancing allows, a natter with fellow enthusiasts on that sort of thing. So you get all that on the Friday, and a good chance to look around the museum, waste your money in the shop, do all those different things, and then back on the Saturday to actually see the Tiger and a number of other vehicles run, which is normally going to be about 1 o'clock, I think it is, we do. But if you're interested in that, we've still got tickets. Normally these all sell out all the time, but as you can imagine, what with COVID and the fact that a lot of foreign visitors who come to Tiger Day can't make it because of travel restrictions, if you are able to come along, have a look on the website, because we've knocked down the price for that Friday for a limited time. So if it looks like something you might want to do, or come with a mate or something or other, have a quick look, because I think you've got a week or so where the price is lower than it normally is. And obviously from our point of view, we're keen to fill up that day as well, because again, it's another income source for us. And if obviously, I know a lot of you out there are Tiger fans, so if that's your opportunity, if you had to see it, we only run the Tiger a couple of times a year. So I've done that one. Yeah, so it says here actually until the 8th of September, so you can get a discount on if you book in. So what are all those other interesting things I can show you that you'll be interested in? I can see you all asking. So those of you who are jigsaw people, very detailed, 1,000-piece jigsaw, we have those in stock. We managed to pick up, so this is another thing why you sometimes look at the stuff in the shop there, because new stuff coming in all the time, but also we're getting some really good offers going as well with some of the suppliers and everything. And this, you can buy a pack, I think 5 is it, or 6 of these models, which are, he says, trying to work out the scale on it. They're small ones that actually you do need to glue together, but they all set up as part of a game. And I think in the offer, if they're not all broken, you end up getting an aeroplane with it, or a helicopter. But what it is, it's actually, we've done it, you can buy them individually, or we've done it as a pack. And it's basically a wargaming game, but it's one of these ones that apparently was very popular because you can actually do it and have a game that doesn't last 3.5 days, and everyone's sort of, on coffee and all sorts of things at the end of it. This is one you can have a game in about half an hour, and with the package we've been able to put together, we've also got some sort of gaming mat that comes with it and everything else. So again, if you fancy gaming and making a few of those models, or having them individually, or buying them individually, again, have a look on the website. Let me throw that for the dog, keep him happy. What are the other things? Don't forget, you can buy your Tiger beer, because, get yourself in the mood if you're going to come to Tiger Day, as well as, somewhere over here hiding, you can buy your Tiger signs, metal ones, these ones. Socks are, not only do we have socks in, but we now have, you can buy your tank socks, but different colour ones we've got as well. And if you really want to be have your hosiery and all the right. You can even buy a pack of them now. So, you know, no excuse for not being able to wear tank socks and match the outfit and do everything that way. What else we got? Other fridge magnet Tiger Day ones. You can buy your Tiger Day chocolate as well, so you can all come fully prepared. What was this one? This was oh yeah, that was it. It's even got wheels on the bottom. You can get your Leopard 2, A4 is that? I think it is anyway, from, never heard of them before, Siku, whoever that one is. So we have other types of toy tanks. Did I mention Tiger Day mugs? Sorry, I'm getting a bit Tiger Day-ish. We have back in stock, I mentioned this again because so often there's these books, is it going to rain again? Clouds coming over. We've got Bill Bellamy's story back in, so if you want to pick up a copy of Bill Bellamy's Tank Commander story, and again, when you come to the museum, look out because our new World War II display, Bill Bellamy's in there a fair old bit. Really great story. And another, we picked up this one just to show you, again, look on our website because there's some really great, those knockdown prices, $2.99. It comes across really well, actually, the reviews of this one on the Battle of Alamein, but £2.99. What haven't I done? T-shirts down the front as ever, and those of you, I know you've all liked, oh, don't forget the guidebook. I still recommend, those of you, thank you so much, those of you who come back and said, oh, I see what you mean. It's a really, I say this, I'd like to think, people think it's a really good history of tanks as well. You know, you have to be careful you don't swagger too much because we wrote it and put it all in there, but there's some really good stuff in that, and it's a new one out this year. So we call it a souvenir guidebook, but it's really just a nice history of the tank, but lots of our collection in there and a lot of issues about tanks in there as well. So pick that one up. Yeah, sorry, those of you who like your clothing stuff, we've got these back in stock. You can buy your tank underpants. This one says fume extractor at rear, quite what that means I'm not sure, and we have a number of different logos that you can buy on your tank ones. Yes, I'm sorry dog, I know you don't approve of these ones. In case of emergency, pull down, and I think there's some other logos on them. And the rain is just about to start, so I better swiftly move on. We also have our calendar, which is the other one that if you're putting an order in, who doesn't need a calendar or has got a nephew or someone, and that prompts me to quickly come to the end, and I do apologise, but the rain's starting. Yes, I know the rain's starting. So I better cover this all over and try and put the camera out the wet. So thank you as ever, those of you who've been supporting us. Have a look at the website if you want to find out about the shop on this, or if you fancy that, Tiger Day, or any other information. And if you are coming down to the museum, I know a number of you have said hello. Sorry if we've been running around doing things, but it's really good to see people starting to come back from Finn, and the rain is coming. I better pack up. So thank you very much, and bye-bye again. In these difficult times, obviously your support is really valued. So please do keep following us on social media, do subscribe to our channel, and if you've got the opportunity, perhaps order something from our shop, join one of our schemes like Patreon or our Friends organisation, and we'll try and keep going with giving you some content to keep you informed and entertained.